not that this matters, but things that I use all the time, if we go from this bottom paragraph down, from perspective, sensitivity, you always want to be in verbal what you're doing. I'm connecting your front belts, I'm connecting your rear belts. The floor anchorages, you may have specific buses that have different anchorages, make sure you talk about those. Outside the footrests, inside the rear wheels. You don't have to get to all these measurements all the time. 45-degree belt angles, there's 40 to 60, 30 to 45 in the rear and the front. But ultimately, you know, the ultimate goal is outside the footrest, inside the rear wheels. No footrests, no armrests, and no axles. And we'll talk about that again. Personally, you have to do your own policies, but I think the policy should be that you proceed with the occupant restraint until they refuse. They have the right to refuse the occupant restraint. They don't have the right to refuse the belts on the floor. So you don't require your other passengers to ride in an unsecure seat. Why would you require or allow them to ride in an unsecure seat? So you always secure the chair, proceed with the occupant restraint until they deny. When they deny, and it's factual, they're going to remember, everybody's going to know, and quite frankly, your operators are going to be better at securing occupant restraints. Oftentimes, people won't accept the occupant restraint because of the length of time it took to secure the chair, and then the disposition of the operator and how they address that person. Obviously, that potentially could be a big factor. How many people are on the bus? Are they angry because the bus is being held up because we're securing the chair? Or if the operator just proceeds and already has a third of it done, or 20% of it done, or 70% of it done, do you want your occupant restraint? They may just say, yes, I do want that. But if we stare at them and say, you know, do you want your occupant restraint? No, just go. You know, I mean, you made a spectacle of them at that point, they're likely to deny. And then also, obviously, a big factor on occupant restraints is how clean they are on the floor. If they're laying on the floor, if they're disgusting, obviously, in the Midwest with snow and salt, what have you, nobody wants dirty belts on them. So that's a factor that when you're walking buses, and I think everyone here can walk buses and see a lot of clues on what's being used and what's not being used, what you see laying on the floor, or what you find if you go in the pouches and you can't find the portion of the occupant restraint. Clearly, they're not using the occupant restraint if you can't find the part on the bus. Those types of scenarios, we're all pretty common sense driven. People in this room didn't get where they're at because they didn't know that kind of stuff. So just simply walking buses sometimes can give you some factors on what's happening and what's not. Make sure that you demonstrate the lap and shoulder belt and routing of that belt through the slice of the back of the chair. We'll do all that. Lap and shoulder belts are never over the armrests. Review a closed armrest. We'll do that today with hands-on. Talk about your scooters. Talk about the WC19 wheelchairs pre-trip. Again, review your test and your training records, or review your training questions, review the training record, and ask for questions. It's all right here, real simple. I can't make it any simpler for you without doing it myself at the situation. So just know that. In regards to the presentation itself, some of you guys know some of the stuff. I'm sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Real quick, I don't know if you want to wait till the hands-on part of it, but just a common question about the wheelchair 19.
Yep.
It comes up in training quite a bit that it seems to, if a driver really doesn't understand it, especially now with the generic chairs out there with the additional attachments without the logo, I think at least the training that I did with fixed route drivers the last couple of years, they get really scared about now you throw this loop in there that there's these attachment points that may not be certified. Through your experiences, what can ease in training the wheelchair 19 so that it's more effective training rather than scaring drivers? And then also, I guess, on that, you know, a lot of times I go in and I say, if you're unsure whether it's an actual certified attachment point, just go through your motions and still look for rigid frame members and things like that.
Exactly.
Attached that way. Is that, you know, kind of the basis for that? Is that what you would recommend?
That's really what I'm telling them in most cases. You know, it's an imperfect situation that we're in, and it's going to it is going to get, I think, somewhat more complicated. I have some suggestions on policies when we talk about the new WC19 wheelchairs coming out. You guys have to draw your own conclusions. If you have legal advice, or the council or the WURTA organization may come up with a statewide policy that they think will work best for their people, there's always comfort in numbers. There's no doubt about that. The difficult portion as we transition, the law does not dictate that we have to have securement points on these chairs at this point. We're headed in the right direction, which we'll talk about in those scenarios. But as a factor, I think the big thing is when you're doing your training, again, awareness, and I'm getting a little bit on a side note here, talk about attorneys and what have you, but you know, doing a wheelchair securement training, and documenting this from those of you who are specifically responsible for training your people, You know, a training is not always doing the video and doing this and everything else. If you have a quarterly safety meeting, you have all your operators in there, there's going to be some motion slides in here that I've got on a thumb drive to make available to the organization that we can hopefully give this to one person and maybe we can isolate it so that it's protected, that only your organization can use it. But ultimately, you could open up a safety meeting and play a simple 60-second video. You could play one motion slide where the person doesn't have the occupant restraint on. You could play the You Never Know video that you're going to see here in a second and say, hey guys, remember, you know, we never know when that accident's going to occur. Hey guys, remember how important wheelchair securement is. You know it. I know it takes a lot of time. I know it's hard. I know we have difficult people. You know, you can play off it a little bit and dictate 30 seconds to wheelchair securement and document that you discussed it in that safety meeting. And quite frankly, that's that. If the awareness is high, those incidences are going to be low. You can post an insignia like this, an insignia like this, and come up with your own drawings as to, you know the difference, that kind of a scenario. I think that the reality of it is when it's only discussed once a year or once in their career, there's a lot of discomfort. If it's discussed all the time, and it is going to be a common sense situation, when you see that insignia, we know that's where we're going to connect to. When we don't see this insignia, it's back to basics. Oh, there's attachment places on the chair. Well, is it welded? Is it bolted? Is it plastic? And like my favorite saying is, if it was your daughter, would you hook there? Pretty simple at that point. Get serious right down and dirty when you throw the question in that way. And oftentimes you'll see an operator say, well, no, I wouldn't hook there if it was, you know. Well, then you're on pace with me. You know, me as a director or a safety and training manager, we both are facing the same situation. What's the next best situation to connect to? Because that's the only answer we have. We can't. It's impossible to have clear-cut definition. We're going to talk about difficult chairs, and we have some difficult chairs here that we're going to talk about today. And I have a couple pictures to try to break it down for them so that they can be calmer. There's not a magic paragraph. Maybe we can come up with something as a team and have a paragraph for them, but basically, see the symbol, that's where we go. Don't see the symbol, welded frame, or if there are loops, like for instance, the people who dropped the chairs off this morning, they came in and they said, hey, they have a chair like this, and they've got these little loops here, metal loops on there. And he says, you know, those aren't designed to be hooked to, you're going to damage the chair. And I said, well, then why are they on there? And he says, well, it'll damage the chair. And I said, then why are they on there? You know, I mean, you know, then get them off from there. I said, I've read the owner's manual. I can't tell you the exact owner's manual that it was, but 3 or 4 years ago, I paged through a owner's manual online, looking at a chair like that had unmarked, did not have this insignia, repeating it, did not, and found instruction in there that said that was where they place the hooks on an unoccupied wheelchair. Well, if it's good enough to hold a 250-pound chair, it's probably good enough to hold it's probably the best game we got going. You know, unless it's plastic or cheesy. And she says, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And he brought the subject up, you know, and one thing for sure I do know, it don't make sense. But we can't fix the law. We can only do the best we can with it. And the more we preach that common sense, the better their common sense gets, the less chance we're going to have an incident. One thing for sure, and I would never say this to your people unless it's up to you, you draw your own decision. The reality of it is, this is serious business, and it's so important to set the standard. Between us in the room, I believe if we get close, and if he doesn't have a catastrophic driving incident, we likely will not have an issue. If they use general fundamentals and get attachment points close, if the person doesn't turn the power on and try to do something stupid, if we don't run into a freight train, if we don't hit a cement truck, if we don't tip the thing over on its side, we're likely going to get to that destination. If we hit a curb, it could get iffy, because I don't know how structurally sound the mobility device is, or how badly they missed the 100 percentile goal. Were they in the 90, 80, 70? How bad a job did they do? But if we can keep them in the top 80+%, and they don't have a catastrophic accident, things ain't going to happen. I hate to say this, and this is Mike talking now, not Q-Screen. When I hear about a problem, most of the time, terrible, terrible thing for me, most of the time I think to myself, there's no way that can happen if you did it correctly. We hear operators say, well, you know, we had all the belts on, the belt failed. Or I had it hooked there. And you hear about what happened, or if you get video cameras are amazing. They're the greatest thing in the whole world, and they protect the operator, and they sure tell the truth. But I'm very, very skeptical in most cases that we had a chair tip over, and the operator did everything correctly. You know, when usually he missed a belt, or he hooked too low, or he did something negligent in that situation. You know, I rarely hear about a chair breaking unless there was a severe impact. So the goal here is preach all these fundamentals at 100%. They get close, and we don't have a catastrophic accident, of course. If we have a catastrophic accident, everybody in the bus is suing you. But ultimately, if they get close, we shouldn't have this many problems. You know, I mean, really, really should. So, I don't know if I did a good job of answering that, Derek, but again, call me out. I have to go. They say, put this in a new profile for us now. We used to do our own presentations, and they've taken some of mine and redone it. So I may be a little bit reading the slide to some point, because this is the second time I've done this presentation. It used to be I could recite it without actually even looking at the slides. But basically, securements work. When they're done properly, they will work correctly. This is a great tool that's available on that thumb drive for your organization. To show drivers and to give them a little wake-up call. If you don't get the chills on some of this, you're probably
in this video, you will see a highway accident.